Afternoon session 12 p.m.
The court said, "Please have the jurors brought in."
Jury present.
The court said, "Please be seated. Sir, remember that you're still under oath."
The witness said, "Yes."
The court said, "You may continue the inquiry."
Mr. Kumraju said, "All right. Could we have those two exhibits back up, or I think we were looking at GXZ26 when we broke. Please. Slide 8.
By Mr. Kumraju.
Okay. Now just go through this slide quickly. The Savio Law account you looked at before with Ms. Murray, you remember that?
Yes.
Okay. That was a U.S. bank account, correct?
Yes.
Okay. The IDB account for HCHK Technologies, U.S. bank account, correct?
Yes.
The IVB account for Leading Shine, U.S. bank account, right?
Yes.
All the Lamp Capital bank accounts, U.S. bank accounts, right?
Yes.
Same with the Greenwich Land account, right?
Yes.
Same for the signature accounts reflected for Lamp Capital.
Yes.
Same for the IDB accounts, correct?
Yes.
And the same for the DCB account, correct?
Yes.
For Lexington Property.
Yes, I believe so.
Mr. Kumraju said, "Now could we pull up alongside this exhibit GXZ27, please?" All right. So Ms. Murray took you through this. Do you remember that?
I do.
Okay. So on GXZ27, which is on the right side, the total number of accounts that Brattle identified was 681 accounts, correct?
Yes.
Processed accounts, 450, right?
Yes.
Okay. So that means that, is processed and analyzed the same subset?
Well, it depends on what you mean by processed and analyzed. Analyzed sometimes we think of as including the processing, right? That's part of the analysis in a broad sense.
Okay. I guess what I'm trying to ask, sir, and maybe doing it inartfully, is, the 450 accounts that are reflected there. Those are ones that Brattle actually looked at and reviewed and attempted to provide evidence on. Sorry. Withdrawn. Those are accounts that Brattle actually reviewed and kind of dove into, the 450.
Right. Those are the ones that we extracted the transaction data from, put them in the database. And that was the starting point for various exhibits that were developed for testimony. But not all of the transactions and accounts that are in the database end up in the exhibits.
Got it. Understood. Thank you, sir. That's helpful. So then the 231 that's reflected there, those accounts never made it to the database, right?
We did not process those, that's correct.
Okay. So no data from those 231 bank accounts is reflected in the summary chart anywhere, right?
That's correct.
And it's not reflected in any of the summary charts that you've testified about today other than this little entry that we're looking at. Right?
Correct.
So the chart reflects, withdrawn. Mr. Kumraju said, we can take GXZ27 down. And I'd like to put up DX10339 alongside, which is in evidence, so we can publish it. Please. Okay. Can we go to page 3, please? Okay. Do you see at the bottom there, 3 transfers, May 2nd?
Yes.
Mr. Kumraju said, okay. Actually, I'm sorry. Can we zoom out real quick? I think it would be helpful to establish the date. Do you see the line service charge summary? Can you read that, please? Mr. Kumraju said, maybe we can highlight it.
Yes. Service charge summary from April 1st, 2018 through April 30th, 2018.
So that's the period of this bank statement, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And now let's look down at those transfers. You see the ones from May 2nd?
Yes.
Okay. So that's $300,000 over the course of those 3 transfers, correct?
Yes.
And who were those transfers from?
They are from ACA Capital.
Mr. Kumraju said, okay. And let's zoom back out. And let's go to the top. And let's see whose bank account this is. Please. Do you see Golden Spring, New York, there?
Yes.
Okay. That's the bank account holder, correct?
I believe so.
All right. Now these 3 transfers of $300,000 are not reflected in your summary chart, correct?
That's correct.
Mr. Kumraju said, let's go to page 13, please. All right. And do you see a transaction on July 19th, for $2 million? Mr. Kumraju said, maybe we can blow that up.
I do.
Who is that from?
That is from ACA Capital also.
That's not reflected on your summary chart, right?
That's correct.
Mr. Kumraju said, okay. Let's go to page 18, please. All right. And do you see the transfer on August 20th, 2018, for $500,000?
I do.
Who is that from?
ACA Capital.
That's not reflected on your chart, right?
That's correct.
Mr. Kumraju said, so let's go to page 45, please. All right. And do you see a transfer on January 14th, 2019, for approximately $4,499,000?
I do.
Okay. Who is that from?
ACA Capital.
That's not reflected on your chart, right?
That's correct.
Mr. Kumraju said, let's go to page 89. All right. And do you see a transfer of $3 million on August 8th, 2019?
I do.
Who is that from?
This one's from ACA Capital.
Okay. That's not reflected on your chart either, right?
That's correct.
Mr. Kumraju said, okay. Let's take down 10339 and put up 10381. Alongside, please. Okay. And let's flip to the next page, please. Keep going. All right. Actually, let's go to page 23. All right. Let's start at the top. Can you tell us who the account holder is?
Leading Shine NY Limited.
Mr. Kumraju said, all right. And let's scroll back down. And do you see a transfer on January 22nd, 2019, for almost $3 million?
I do.
Okay. Who is that from?
Well, it's from ACA Capital.
Okay. And what bank?
First Abu Dhabi Bank.
All right. That's not reflected on your chart, right?
That's correct.
Mr. Kumraju said, all right. Can we go to page 41, please? And do you see a transfer on August 8th, 2019, for $3 million? Do you see that?
Yes.
Who is that from?
It's from ACA Capital also.
What bank account?
From the First Abu Dhabi Bank account.
That's not reflected on your chart either, is it, Mr. Hinton?
That's correct.
Mr. Kumraju said, no further questions at this time, Your Honor.
The court said redirect.
Ms. Murray said, thank you, Your Honor.
Redirect examination. By Ms. Murray.
Mr. Hinton. You were asked some questions on cross-examination about some of the transactions reflected on slide 8 of Z26. Ms. Murray said, Ms. Loftus, if we could please pull that up. In particular, you were asked about certain of the transactions reflected going into and out of the ACA Capital account depicted here. Do you recall those questions?
I do.
And Mr. Hinton, the government asked you to conduct a check of summary charts that it directed. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Is it accurate that the government did not ask that you do a detailed flow of funds analysis for the various accounts that are reflected here?
That's correct.
Or a flow of funds analysis for any of the bank records that the government had provided to Brattle in the course of this case?
That's correct.
Looking at the outflows from the ACA capital account. Those numbers flowing out to the various different entities' bank accounts, are those accurate?
They are.
Ms. Murray said, Ms. Loftus, if we could now go to slide 12, please. There is a subset, kind of a zoom-in view of the prior chart, is that correct?
That's correct.
So for example, the flows. The collective flows of $29 million from the ACA capital account to these LAMP capital accounts. That's accurate based on the records, correct?
Yes. We verified those transactions into the LAMP capital accounts are reflected in the underlying source documents.
Ms. Murray said, and then Ms. Loftus, next slide, please. And these expenses. These transactions reflected here then from those LAMP capital accounts out to these different expenses. These are accurate as well, right, Mr. Hinton?
That's correct.
Including luxury car-related expenses depicted in red here?
Yes.
Including yacht-related expenses depicted in blue here?
Yes.
Including aircraft-related expenses depicted in the black here?
Yes.
And including, for example, $20 million going to a Swiss bank account held in the name of Chongwood depicted on the right here?
That's correct.
Ms. Murray said, Ms. Loftus, if we could go to slide 15 of this exhibit, please. Mr. Hinton. Mr. Kumraju asked you some questions about the different boxes that are depicted on this summary chart. Do you recall those questions?
I do.
In particular, for example, he asked you whether the government had requested that the Crane Advisory Group boxes on the right, in the light blue, be reflected in separate boxes rather than aggregated into one. Do you remember that?
I do.
Looking at those Crane Advisory Group boxes, let's start on the top left. What bank account does that reflect?
The top left is a Citibank account, Crane Advisory account, 5278.
And then tracing to the right, what bank does the next one, the 5522 account, reflect?
It's at Signature Bank, 5522.
Going right again, what bank is reflected by the third box?
It's a different bank again, it's Capital One, 0887.
Let's go now, middle at the left, there are a series of MSS accounts. What banks are those accounts in the name of Crane Advisory Group held?
Morgan Stanley accounts. There's 4 of them.
To the right here, IDB, what bank does that represent?
I think it's an Israel Deposit Bank.
So these 5 different boxes on this summary chart. Is it correct that those represent accounts held at 5 different banks in the name of Crane Advisory Group?
It does.
And the flow of funds depicted among and between those accounts reflected on this chart. Those are accurate, correct?
They are.
Ms. Murray said, Ms. Loftus, if we could go to the same exhibit, and let's go to slide 4, please. Mr. Hinton, you were asked some questions about time periods reflected on various of the summary charts. Do you recall that?
I do recall.
In particular, with respect to this slide. Mr. Kumraju asked you whether expanding a time period would account for a larger amount of funds shown on a summary. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, Mr. Hinton, these summary charts that we've been going through. These only reflect certain of the process transactions that Brattle had been given bank records for, is that right?
That's correct.
And the government selected what information, if any, to include in these summary charts?
That's correct.
And I believe you testified, sir, that the summary charts were under-inclusive of transactions based on the bank records. Even just the bank records that Brattle processed, is that right?
That's correct.
So looking here at the GTV/VOG overview, and I'm going to ask you, sir, to do a little bit of quick and dirty math on the so we have 286.9 million going to Soraka. Do you see spot that?
Yes.
If we add the approximately 29.6 million on the right and the 72.9 million on the left, and you may approximate, can you let me know what the total aggregate amount would be for GTV/VOG?
Yes. Well, adding the approximately 30 million to the 286, that would get you 316. And then adding 73 would get you to 403.
Try it one more time.
Sorry. 309, yeah, 309 or 310 million. Sorry. 410 million.
Let's break it down one more time. And again, I'm sorry to put you on the spot. So the 286 plus the 30 million or so gets us to 316, is that right?
Yeah.
Mr. Kamraju said, objection. Asked and answered.
Yeah, 316, and then 72 onto 316 is 406.
The court said, overruled.
So fair to say approximately 400 million or so, give or take.
Yes.
Ms. Murray said, Ms. Loftus, can you please put up alongside this government exhibit STIP 19? Mr. Hinton, have you seen this exhibit before, on the right?
On the right, no.
This is a stipulation between the parties that, if called to testify, an employee of the SEC or Securities and Exchange Commission would state the following, among other things. Ms. Murray said, and going to page 2 of STIP 19, please, Ms. Loftus. If you could read the first sentence in paragraph 3 there, please, Mr. Hinton.
Pursuant to the agreement.
I'm sorry. If you could just read slowly and read each of the words in that text.
Certainly. Pursuant to the settlement agreement, Soraka, GTV, and VOG have sent to the SEC $455,211,346.39 related to the GTV private placement, including $69,713,578.60 from Soraka's investment in Hinton Capital Management.
And you can stop there for a moment. And then going to the next sentence. As of the date of this stipulation, can you please read that portion as well?
As of the date of this stipulation, Soraka and GTV together, on a joint and several basis, owe an additional $31,488,392.52 to the SEC. And VOG owes an additional $45,324 to the SEC.
Now, Mr. Hinton, the entity names reflected in the stipulation on the right. Are those the same entity names we see in the summary chart on the left?
They are.
So that's VOG, GTV, Soraka?
Yeah. I mean, Hinton Capital is not mentioned, but the others are.
Understood. And in the summary chart, which reflects a subset of the bank records that Brattle was provided. I think we said the aggregate amount for this overview of GTV/VOG sources of funds was approximately 400 million. Is that right?
Yes.
The initial amount in the stipulation on the right, what's the approximate amount of that? In the second line?
455 million.
Plus there's an additional amount in the second to last line. What is that amount?
31 million.
Is 480 million more than 400 million?
Yes. Stip 19.
Ms. Murray said, all right. Ms. Loftus, we could go to slide 27 of Z26. Mr. Hinton. You were also asked various questions about some of the date ranges reflected on this Himalaya exchange flow slide. Do you recall those questions?
Yes.
In particular, Mr. Kamraju pulled up a document and he indicated to you that the launch date of the exchange was November of 2021. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And then pointed to some of the flows here that included an earlier time period, and in particular, if we're looking at the sources of funds, the 473.8 million begins on the summary chart on June 2, 2021, right?
Yes.
Ms. Murray said, Ms. Loftus, if we could pull up Government Exhibit Z9, and go to page 93. Mr. Hinton, what is the date in the leftmost column on this government exhibit?
May 20th, 2021.
Ms. Murray said, and if we could zoom in on the top portion, Ms. Loftus, through to the end of the second paragraph. Mr. Hinton, there's a bracket with a date and then some text in bold on the top of the screenshot. Can you please read that?
May 20th, 2021, Miles Getter, 3rd.
All right. And let's read the first paragraph here, starting with, there is another issue. Can you read that carefully please for the jury?
There is another issue I want to mention to my brothers and sisters. I want to reiterate that all those who have bought G Club membership cards must hurry up and finish a series of actions, including KYC and reconciliation, as quickly as you can. This is a race against time. I don't want to talk about other things anymore.
All right. And then let's go to the next paragraph. You could start the beginning of that paragraph. Ms. Murray said, and Ms. Loftus, I may ask you to highlight some of the text as we go. But go ahead, Mr. Hinton.
More importantly, fellow fighters who want to buy Himalaya coins and Himalaya dollars must complete their KYC carefully and thoughtfully. Read the instructions carefully, contact the Himalaya farms if you need help. You must not waste any time completing your KYC.
If you could pause there, please, Mr. Hinton. Ms. Murray said, Ms. Loftus, if you could highlight those 2 points, the text at the beginning. Buy Himalaya coins, through to dollars. And then the sentence, you must not. And Mr. Hinton, again, looking at the left, with respect to the text that's written here. You must not waste any time. On what date was this summary posted online, according to this exhibit?
May 20th, 2021.
And then let's go just to the last couple of lines here. Ms. Murray said, Ms. Loftus, if you could highlight starting with, please try your best, the third to last line. Through to the end. Can you read that, please, Mr. Hinton?
Please try your best to pay with the Himalaya Dollar, HDO, account that you will get after you have passed KYC. Soon you can buy G Fashion products through your HDO account.
Ms. Murray said, thank you, Ms. Loftus. You can take that down. Mr. Hinton. Mr. Kumraju also asked you some questions about whether the information reflected in your summary charts is helpful to Miles Gwa. Do you recall those questions?
Yes.
Do you know what's helpful to Miles Gwa?
I do not.
Do you know what's helpful to the government?
I do not.
Do you know any of the government's other witnesses in this case?
I do not.
Do you know any of the government's other evidence other than materials that the government has provided to you for purposes of Brattle's work in this case?
I do not.
Have you been told anything about the underlying facts of this case by the government?
I have not.
Ms. Murray said, may I have a moment, Your Honor?
The court said okay.
Ms. Murray said, I'm not sure if we have this, Ms. Loftus. If not, I might request the defense pull up Defense Exhibit 10339.
Mr. Kumraju said, Jorge, do you mind pulling that up?
Ms. Murray said, and we can go page 29.
By Ms. Murray.
Mr. Hinton, this is one of the documents that Mr. Kumraju asked you about on cross-examination. Ms. Murray said, sorry. Maybe it's a couple of pages past. It was the $3 million transaction that Mr. Kumraju inquired about. Sorry. Page 89, please. Thank you. All right. And if we could zoom in on the bottom portion. There are a couple of entries for August 8th. Thank you.
By Ms. Murray.
Mr. Hinton, you were asked questions about this $3 million, the first funds transfer that's depicted here. Do you recall those questions?
Yes.
And that's a wire from ACA Capital Group, is that correct?
Yes.
A wire into this Golden Spring account, right?
Yes.
Do you then see 2 lines down that there is a debit or an outgoing transaction from the same Golden Spring account?
I do.
And what is the amount of that transaction?
It's also $3 million.
And is that the same day that the $3 million came in from the ACA Capital Group?
Yes, it is.
Ms. Murray said, thank you so much. I appreciate it. We can take that down. Ms. Loftus, let's put up Z26. And let's go to page 33. Mr. Hinton. This is kind of the high-level summary of the flow of funds contained within this summary exhibit, is that correct?
It is.
And looking at the Himalaya exchange category the government identified. What is the amount of sources of funds into the Himalaya exchange account based on the processed accounts that Brattle looked at here?
Yeah, grouping all of the Himalaya accounts together. The total is 517 million of inflows from sources of funds.
Mr. Hinton. Are you aware that the government seized approximately $640 million from bank accounts that were held in the name of the Himalaya exchange or entities that controlled it? Including Hamilton?
No.
And $640 million is more than $517 million, correct?
Yes.
Ms. Murray said, we can take that down. Thank you. Finally, Mr. Hinton, are you aware that Miles Govt filed for bankruptcy in 2022?
No.
Are you aware that he reported that he had less than approximately $500,000 in assets?
I do not.
Are you aware that he, withdrawn? Are you aware that G Clubs purchased a mansion in New Jersey for approximately $24.5 million? Of the funds that were analyzed during the flow of funds reflected on these summary charts?
Mr. Kumraju said, object to form.
I have seen.
The court said, can you break that down?
Ms. Murray said, sure. In the course of reviewing bank records, Mr. Hinton. Did those include bank records relating to the transfer of $24.5 million to title services and other companies?
Yes.
And was the source of those funds G Club's accounts?
I believe so.
Ms. Murray said, if I may have a moment, Your Honor.
The court said, okay.
Ms. Murray said, thank you, Mr. Hinton. Nothing further, Your Honor.
The court said, recross?
Mr. Kumraju said, very briefly, Your Honor. Could I have Z26, please, slide 12.
Recross examination. By Mr. Kumraju.
Mr. Hinton, Ms. Murray asked you about this slide on redirect, correct?
Yes.
And she asked you whether you'd been asked by the government to do I believe the phrase was detailed flow of fund analysis. Correct?
I believe that's what she said.
Okay. Now you weren't asked to do that, right?
That's correct.
And because you weren't asked to do a detailed flow of fund analysis, you can't say whether any part of that $77 million accounts for any part of that $13 million that goes to LAMP, right?
Right. If you wanted to know precisely how much flowed through the accounts, you'd have to do a tracing analysis.
And you didn't do that, right?
I haven't done that.
Mr. Kumraju said, okay. No further questions.
The court said, all righty. Thank you, sir. You may step out. Witness.
Witness excused.